What is environmental crisis? Environmental crisis describe the sum of the environmental problems that we face today. It occurs when changes to the environment of a species or population destabilize its continued survival. What are the leading environmental problems? The triple planetary crisis refers to the three main interlinked issues that humanity currently faces: climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Each of these issues has its own causes and effect. Climate change. Climate change refers to a long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns. Human activities have been the main driver of climate change due to burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. Burning fossil fuels generates greenhouse gas emission that act like a blanket wrap around the earth, trapping the sun's heat and raising temperatures. Example is the El Nino and La Nina cycle, which can cause temporarily warming and cooling. Both phenomena affect atmospheric circulation patterns and influence global climate. While El Nino increases global temperature, La Nina decreases it. This cycle repeats itself on a timescale of about 5 years. Pollution. Pollution is defined as unwanted chemical or physical materials in an area that negatively impacts the environment. This is caused by waste materials, which can be gas, liquid, solid, or any other form of pollution. Pollution can cause adverse effects on the environment and have significant consequences. Example is burning coal to create electricity to pollute the air. Industries and homes generate garbage and sewage that can pollute the land and water. Pesticides, chemical poisons used to kill weeds and insects, seep into waterways and harm wildlife. Biodiversity loss. Biodiversity loss refers to the decline or disappearance of biological diversity, understood as the variety of living things that inhabit the planet. Its different levels of biological organization and their respective genetic variability, as well as the natural patterns present in ecosystem. Biodiversity loss is caused by 5 primary drivers: habitat loss, invasive species, overexploitation, extreme hunting, and fishing pressure. Pollution, climate change associated with global warming. In each case, human beings and their activities plays direct roles. Example is clearing trees from a forest eliminates the shading, temperature, and moisture regulation, animal habitat, and nutrient transport services they provide to the ecosystem.
Global environmental crisis. Global environmental issues is a phrase that refers to the effect of the climate of human actions, especially the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, and large-scale deforestation, which create emissions of greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is the most important. When a species of population's habitat changes, it destabilizes its survival. Cause of global environmental crisis. Burning fossil fuels, car emissions, and chlorofluorocarbons produce greenhouse gases. This has caused global warmings and environmental changes. Global warming is the global temperature rise. Basic outline of the environmental crisis. Some of the questions surrounding the nature and severity of the current environmental catastrophe are very disputed. The following concerns are considered part of the environmental crisis. The climate change. So climate change already has biological and socio-economic implications, and its expected effects could affect global mean surface temperature. It's caused by fossil fuel combustions, agriculture and pastoralism's emission, and forest degradation, clearing, and burning. Stratospheric ozone depletion. Depletion of stratospheric ozone from CFCs and other halocarbons is another environmental issue. High altitudes without protecting ozone allow more UVB to reach the Earth's surface. Degraded air quality. Some air pollutants are known carcinogens and can damage vegetation, causing ecological effects. 1 billion people lives in unhealthy air pollution areas, mainly industrial cities. Degraded water quality. Pollution degrades water quality, causing health and environmental problems such as the degradation of coral reefs. In many coastal areas, terrestrial runoff pollutes inshore seas. Mining and industrial practices that produce hazardous wastewater also pollute water. Scarcity of fresh water. Poor water management is to blame for a lack of fresh drinking water in many parts of the world. Over-abstraction causes water shortages and salinization downstream. Irrigation practices deplete water sources and salinized land. Land contamination. Resistant chemical species contaminate land. Contaminated land must be restored before being used for agriculture, construction, or pleasure. Contaminated land can harm the ecosystem and human health. Then the soil erosion and degradation. There is a growing sense of urgency regarding issues including soil erosion, deterioration, and desertification. While assessments of soil erosion and degradation have gotten more sophisticated in recent years, it is obvious that these challenges continue to have substantial implications for agricultural and pastoral output, as well as the functioning of natural ecosystems.
What is global environmental crisis? The term global environmental issues refers to the impact that human behavior has on the climate, particularly the burning of fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, and extensive deforestation, which result in significant emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the most significant of which is carbon dioxide. What caused global environmental crisis? Worldwide temperatures are increasing. The production of coal, oil, and gas results in the annual release of billions of tons of CO2 into the atmosphere with no indications of slowing down. Human activity is producing greenhouse gas emissions at record levels. What could be the effect of global environmental crisis in our everyday life? So, there are less natural areas left. Areas are being deprived of rain due to high temperatures, a lack of precipitation, and desertification. This indicates that rivers in these areas are receding, which result in the drying up and sometimes even disappearance of lakes, ponds, and wells. Pollution. There are numerous ways in which our air pollution can harm trees and crops, reduce development and survival of tree seedlings, decrease yields of agricultural crops and commercial forests, and increase vulnerability of plants to disease, pests, and other environmental pressures are all effects of ground level ozone, such as harsh weather, global warming. Rising temperatures are fueling environmental degradation, natural disasters, weather extremes, food and water insecurity, economic disruption, conflict, and terrorism. Sea levels are rising, the Arctic is melting, coral reefs are dying, oceans are acidifying, and forests are burning. Desertification. Desertification contributes to global climate change by increasing exposed and land surface, hence albedo, increasing the potential and decreasing the actual evaporanspiration rate, changing the ground surface energy budget and adjoining air temperature, and adding dust and carbon dioxide to that temperature to the atmosphere. Ozone depletion. Ozone depletion is a major environmental problem because it increases the amount of ultraviolet or UV radiation that reaches Earth's surface, which increases the rate of skin cancer, eye cataracts, and genetic and immune system damage.
So my topic is desertification, ozone depletion. So ozone layer depletion and varying intensity of UVB, radiation reaching on the Earth's surface and ability of soil nutrient. Status exerts of a significant impact on disease developments on Thompson et al. 1993, so from global climate change in 2021. So global environmental problems and railroads, the global environmental issues defined by the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. So consists of 9 items including ozone layer depletion, global warming, acid rain, and desertification. So in 1987, the World Commission on Environment and Development proposed the concept of sustainable development, and Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer was adopted. So, in 1992, the United Nations Framework Conventions and Climate Change was adopted, and the Earth Summit, United Nations Conference on the Environment and Development, UNCED, in which approximately 180 countries participate, was held in the Earth Summit Agenda in 21, so which presents specific programs against the many issues of concerning air quality conversation. So forest desertification, biological diversity, marine protection, and waste disposal, so was adopted in December 1997. So the third session of the Conference of the Parties of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change of COP3, so was held where the Kyoto Protocol was adopted. Thus, it is well recognized that the progress of global warming may have an extensive and a serious impact on the environment of humans and other living beings. So, direct effect of global warming in our health may include an increase in the occurrence of heat strokes owing the higher summit temperatures and heat waves, and change in mortality rates associated with disease in the cardiovascular and respiratory system. So, for example, raising is the major cause of the desertification. So, worldwide, other factors that cause desertification include urbanized climate, um, changes or overuse of groundwater, deforestation, natural disaster, and tillage practices is agriculture that makes soil more vulnerable to wind.
So, is there a solution or a resolution to these problems globally. No? So countries have tried or trying. So we have the Kyoto Protocol, which was signed by countries to reduce the emissions of the greenhouse gases. So on December 11, 1997, delegates from more than 150 countries signed the Kyoto Protocol. It is an agreement to lower the amount of greenhouse gases released into the atmosphere. Human activities released greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which have been proven to cause climate change. No? So the Kyoto Protocol operationalizes the United Nations Framework Conventions on Climate Change by committing industrialized countries and economies in transition to limit, no, and reduce the greenhouse gases emissions in accordance with agreed individual targets. The protocol sets target, but it left to the individual countries to determine how best they would achieve these goals, while some countries made a necessary move to reduce their contribution to global warming. So like the US, which is the biggest polluter in the world, is not joining the effort. No. So and other developing countries lack the fund to implement the protocol, as many of them need international aid to keep things moving. So in 2010, the World Bank report that the protocol had only a slight impact on reducing global emissions because of the non-binding nature of the Kyoto Protocol agreement. So non-binding meaning not legally necessary to obey or follow. Moving on, we have the follow-up treaty of the Kyoto Protocol, which is the Paris Accord, negotiated by 195 countries in December 2015. It seeks to limit the increase in the global average temperature based on which has determined carbon dioxide emissions limits per country, provides more countries to decide on their national targets, and it largely passed as international legislation because it emphasizes consensus buildings. So, but it is not clear that whether this agreement will have more success than the Kyoto Protocol, no? So nganong gitawag manig follow-up treaty sa Kyoto Protocol? So it is because the Kyoto Protocol was in fact doomed from its birth in 1997 because it did not encompass the world's largest and fastest growing economies. So it excluded developing countries, no? So like the People's Republic of China, so from binding targets, and the USA failed to sign up.
Hi, so my topic is all about related legislation. So this is the Environmental Protection Agency has principal implementation authority for the following federal government laws. So these laws are Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, Federal Insecticide and Rodenticide Act, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, Toxic Substances Control Act, and Frank R. Lautenberg Chemical Safety for the 21st Century Act. So let's go ahead and start with the EPA. So what is EPA? It is the Environmental Protection Agency. This is a United States federal government agency whose mission is to protect human and environmental health. So this EPA regulates the manufacturing, processing, distribution of use of chemical and other pollutants. Then the agency enforces its findings through fines, sanctions, and procedures. So first is the Clean Air Act. So from the word clean air, so EPA would make sure that the air that people inhale will be very safe and has less chemicals that would affect badly to humans. So next is the Clean Air Clean Water Act. So this is the primary federal law in the United States as well, governing water pollution. So EPA would also make sure that the water that we use in like taking a bath, in washing dishes would be very safe. And also so how this is being managed, this would recognize the responsibility of a state to address pollution and provide assistance to states to do so. So states would fund publicly to treat their own water and to improve wastewater treatment and to maintain integrity of their wetlands. So next is the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. So this is also known as the Superfund, which hazardous substances, and this gives the EPA the authority to respond directly to actual or potential spills of these materials. So next is the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. So this was created to help communities plan for chemical emergencies. It also requires industry to report on storage, use, and releases of hazardous substances to federal, state, and local governments. So just like on board a ship, if you are like handling a chemical, so there would be a specific place where to store the chemical to like to avoid any explosions, to avoid any chemical reactions like fire explosions and etc. So the EPA would help them to advise where to store these chemicals. And next is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So this provides the federal regulation of pesticide distribution, sale, and use. So the EPA would decide if they would be distributed or sold within the US. If this is very safe to use, then that is the time that it can be sold and can be used by humans. So the next is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. So the EPA gives to control hazardous waste from cradle to grave. So this is all about the trashes and generation, transportation, treatment, storage, and disposal of hazardous waste. So yeah. So next is the Safe Drinking Water Act. So this was the first federal law mandating drinking water standards for all public water systems. So the EPA would help decide if the water that is for drinking is safe. So they would test all the chemicals that's in there. So next is the Toxic Substances Control Act. So the US passed this by 94th US Congress in 1976 that regulates chemicals not regulated by the US federal statutes, including chemicals already in the commerce and introduction of new chemicals. So they would be the one to like maintain or to help regulate this chemicals that being sold in the US. So lastly is the Frank R. Lottenberg Chemical Safety for 21st Century Act. So this amends the Toxic Substances Control Act, the nation's primary chemicals management law. So this new law, which was included, or this includes the much needed improvements, such as the mandatory requirement for EPA to evaluate existing chemicals with clear and enforceable deadlines. So this also includes new risk-based safety standard and increased public transparency for chemical information and consistent source of funding for EPA to carry out the responsibilities under the new law. So that's it for me.
Endangered Species Act, an animal or plant danger from habitat loss, pollution, overharvesting, disease, predation, and other natural occurring or artificial factor must be analyzed and evaluated before it can be placed on the federal list of endangered or vulnerable species, boosting their populations, facilitating their full recovery, and ultimately taking them off the endangered species list. It seeks to conserve our most fragile plants and animals. Energy Independence and Security Act. Energy security, according to the IEA, is the continuous availability of energy sources of competitive prices. There are several phases to energy security. Long-term energy security is primarily concerned with the making timely investments to meet energy needs as they arise in the line with the state of the economy and the environmental. Energy Policy Act. The act aims to assist the Philippines in fast achieving its goal of becoming 60% energy self-sufficient by 2010 by developing and exploiting resources like solar, wind, hydropower, ocean, and biomass energy. Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is strengthening government enforcement of the law of enacting new consumer protection against illegal cosmetic and medical equipment, as well as tightening restriction over medication and food. Food Quality Protection Act. The Food Quality Protection Act 1996 mandates that the Secretary of Agriculture gather information on the pesticides residues in food that babies and young children consume most frequently. To meet this obligation, the AMS Pesticides Data Program PDP offers pesticide residue monitoring. National Environmental Policy Act. This act calls for promotion of environmental awareness through environmental education, which must cover environmental concepts and laws, the state of the local and global environmental best practices, the danger of environmental degradation and its effect on the human well-being, civic responsibility for the environment, and the importance of the protecting, conserving, and restoring natural resources. Oil Pollution Act. This act provides for the adoption of international accepted measures which impose strict liability for oil pollution damage in order to protect Philippines' marine wealth in its archipelagic waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zones. Pollution Prevention Act. The act declares as national policy to maintain reasonable standards of purity for the waters and of this country with their utilization of domestic, agricultural, industrial, and other legitimate purposes.
The relations between population growth of environmental issues and food security. The key elements: population growth, environmental issues, food security. Population growth. Population growth is increase in the number of humans on Earth. For most of human history, our population size was relatively stable, but with innovation and industrialization, energy, food, water, and medical care became more available and reliable. Consequently, global human population rapidly increased and continues to do so with dramatic impacts on global climate and ecosystems. We will need technological and social innovation to help us support the world's population as we adapt to and mitigate climate and environmental changes. Increasing ecological impacts on environments. Forests and habitats are disturbed or destroyed to construct urban areas, including the constructions of homes, businesses, and roads to accommodate growing population. Additionally, as populations increase, more land is used for agricultural activities to grow crops and support livestock. This in turn can decrease species populations, geographic ranges, biodiversity, and alter interactions among organisms. Increasing fishing and hunting, which reduces species populations of the exploited species. Fishing and hunting can also indirectly increase numbers of species that not fished or hunted if more resources become available for the species that remain in the ecosystem. In conclusion, the impact of so many humans on environmental takes two major forms: consumption of resources such as land, food, water, or fossil fuels and minerals, then waste products as a result of consumption such as air and water pollutants, toxic materials, and green gases. Population growth and food security. The question of population growth has long been connected with the topic of food security. Since the 1960s, global growth in agricultural production has outpaced population increase. However, this success has come and at high cost. First, food systems are already exceeding some planetary boundaries for key resources and are generating tremendous food loss and waste. Second, current diets are resulting in premature mortality and susceptibility to both chronic and infectious disease. Third, food systems continue to be linked with vast inequalities, including the presence of hunger and food insecurity, and the struggle for decent livelihoods by workers across food systems. The relationships between population and food security involve more than a mere sufficiency of calories for a growing population to ensure a healthy future for both people and planet. The growing population must be fed in a manner that is healthy, equitable, and sustainable.
So, the relationship of population growth to sustainable development. According to the world population clock, the current population is increased at 67 million people per year as estimated, and 8 billion people alive as of 2022 survey. How does population growth matters for a sustainable development? As a matter of a fact, rapid increase of population can be both negative and positive, for it is challenging of ensuring sustainable and inclusive development for the future. For sustainability includes health, education, and gender equality. Population growth is both a cause and a symptom of slow progress is development. Sustained rapid population growth adds to the challenges of achieving social and economic development and magnifies the scale of the investments and effort required to ensure that no one is left behind. Changes in population trends alone will do little to resolve unsustainable patterns of resource use. Environmental damage often arises from economic processes that lead to higher standards of living for the population, especially when the full social and environmental costs, such as damage from population, are not factored into economic decisions about production and consumption. To achieve a sustainable development, growth of population countries must follow the SDG or Sustainable Development Goals. The effective way for sustainable development of population growth.
So how does population affects future globalization?
So there are some benefits of overpopulation. More people means more labor force, which means that a factory has a many manpower or workforce because of the many workers. They will not get shortage of manpower and they can produce more products. On the other hand, in overpopulation, there are many consumers because the more the population, the more in need of products. The needs of every person in their everyday life. Overpopulation has a good and a bad side effect of future globalization. The example of good effect or benefits of population is that there are many workforce and consumers of the product. Example of that is that higher economic growth. Population growth will lead to economic growth with more people able to produce more goods. It will lead to higher tax revenues which can be spent on public goods such as healthcare and environmental projects. Second is economies of scale. Farming and industry have been able to benefit from economies of scale, which means as the population grows, food output and manufacturing output have been able to grow even faster than population growth. Third is the improved demographic structure of society. Many Western economies are now experiencing a falling population, with the result that their population demographic is being skewed to old retired people. This is imposing costs on society as we struggle to pay for healthcare and pensions. Moderate population growth helps to rebalance the population with a higher share of young, working people. Fourth is the critical mass. Higher populations can enable a critical mass of people to enable a cider, more vibrant society with low populations. There is less scope for diversity, but when the population grows, it can enable the support of a broader cultural range of activities. The bad side is that more people means an increased demand for food, water, housing, energy, and healthcare. Also transportation and more. And all that consumption contributes to ecological degradation, increased conflicts, and a higher risk of large-scale disasters like pandemics. So first example is that cost to the environment. Population growth exacerbates many of the existing environmental problems. First is that higher population will lead to a greater consumption of non-renewable resources, leading to a faster depletion of natural resources. Second is higher population will lead to greater pollution levels in air, water, and land. Higher population is associated with a range of health issues such as cancer and asthma. The population also harms animals and plants. Third is that there will be greater threat on natural habitats as a greater population has greater demand for housing and farmland. This will increase pressure to cut down forests to make way for farming and housing. Second is generating unsustainable waste. We are currently generating non-biodegradable rubbish that we are struggling to process. It tends to end in landfill, causing methane emissions and other toxic problems.